One of the most interesting and fascinating areas of study is the origins of life, especially life on Earth, but it is also very contentious. Many cultures around the Earth have a story of Earth's early beginnings, but there are two that dominate the planet. They are both based on faith, for no human being was an eyewitness to record what took place at the beginning of time. But we will look at these two schools of thought. The more recent of the two is a theory that has been called in the scientific community the Big Bang, the belief that the current world and the universe we now live in came about as a result from an explosion. Where did this idea come from? This unmanned telescope in space is operated by both NASA and the European Space Agency and is called the Hubble telescope. It is named after an Oxford-educated Rhodes Scholar and US astronomer, the late Edwin Powell Hubble. He played a key role in the development of modern observational cosmology with his telescope, where in 1923 he discovered a distance indicating Cepheid variable star in the Andromeda Nebula. He taught that the universe is expanding, and it was labeled as Hubble's law. But he was not the first to make that assertion. He was preceded by another astronomer. This book, titled The Primeval Atom, was written by an unknown astronomer who has influenced modern thinking about the origins of the universe. His name is the Reverend Monseigneur Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian astronomer and a Jesuit-educated Catholic priest. He was the first to propose the theory of the expanding universe, which he called his hypothesis of the primeval atom, or cosmic egg, later to be called the Big Bang theory. It was presented to the highest authority in the Catholic Church, Pope Pius XII, in the 1930s, even though it was first published in 1927, for Lemaitre was a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. He was also an acquaintance of the German-born theoretical physicist Albert Einstein, who is standing on the far right, Lemaitre standing in the center in this photo dated to 1933. They agreed on some points but clashed on others. He was even given a slot in 1931 to publish his views in the world's most cited scientific journal, Nature, where he proposed the beginning of the world from the point of view of quantum theory. Very few people know about Georges Lemaitre, but they have embraced his worldview, and the most influential cosmologists have made it their drive to share his views as far as possible to as much people as they can.
Some part of our being knows this is where we came from. We long to return, and we can, because the cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
Carl Sagan was one of the most influential advocates of Lemaitre's ideas, where Cosmos is the most widely watched series in the history of American public television. It is also aired globally in 60 different countries. His admirer, US astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, the Frederick P. Rose director of the Hayden Planetarium over the Rose Center for Earth and Space, a part of the American Museum of Natural History, is also a strong advocate of Lemaitre's Big Bang theory, where he and other astrophysicists strongly believe that we are all a part of the universe, and that every molecule that makes up a part of our body was formed by an explosion. They believe that nothing created something and formed a perfect equilibrium order on this planet. You may wonder why they believe this. In recent times, there is a deep fascination with DNA, especially the genomes belonging to humans. And sadly, in scientists' search for man's origin, they are stepping into some unethical quarters. But some scientists believe that comets could have sparked life on Earth as building blocks of DNA found in space. Now, why is that? According to the Telegraph newspaper, it reads that now the team behind the Rosetta Comet landing mission have announced they have found the amino acid glycine and the element phosphorus in the dust surrounding 67P Churyumov Gerasimenko. A bit of a mouthful. Interesting argument. Modern scientists are using DNA in an attempt to prove that human life came from space to solidify Lemitrie's Big Bang Theory. Now, this community of men and women would be classed as naturalists. Naturalism is the doctrine that there is no interference of any supernatural power in the universe, and a naturalist is one who holds the doctrine of naturalism, according to Virtue's English Dictionary. And the reason why it is difficult to convince them otherwise is because, but the natural man, that is a naturalist who believes in no supernatural power, receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God. Now why is that? For they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 14. So they believe that they are star stuff. What about the second school of thought? In London Square Mile is a building that was a former stock exchange, and at the top in the centre is a passage of the Holy Scriptures, a psalm of David that reads, "The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof." Psalm 24 and verse 1. The rest of the passage reads, "The world and they that dwell therein." In Genesis, the first book in the Bible, tells us that the earth we live in was designed and shaped by a creator, who we call in the English tongue God, who has no beginning and who has no end. It is very hard for our finite minds to fathom, for we are mortal beings who are confined to time and can only think and visualize reality in what we experience here on earth. The heavens and all its mechanisms, according to Genesis, with its different shapes and colors of different planetary bodies, were carefully planned out and spoken into being. But the planet that has its own distinct uniqueness and set apart from all the others is Earth. From the satellite imagery in space, Earth is a beautiful planet that was designed for different life forms to live on, and one of its most unique substances that almost every living thing depends upon for its survival, from plants to animals, is water, both atmospheric in the heavens and oceanic on the earth. And according to Genesis, this was made on the second day. Some fish stay completely in the water, and others can survive outside of the water. And according to Genesis, every three-dimensional object, aquatic, terrestrial, microscopic, colossal, animate, inanimate, every shape, color, solid, liquid, gas, sound, atom, molecule, were each carefully designed by a creator, each having its own distinct look or character. From the distinct flight of the butterfly, its paper-thin wings can propel it into the air, where it can fly through the air currents with a skill that was perfectly designed for flight. And one man was so in awe at one of the species of birds and the way it flies through the air so gracefully that he was amazed at the way of an eagle in the air. When you look at all these different creatures and their different qualities, doesn't it also make you stop and think? God declares throughout the Holy Scriptures that he stretcheth out the north over the empty place and hangeth the earth upon nothing, in Job chapter 26 and verse 7. So the earth is suspended in space, not held together by any devices. And the emphasis throughout the Holy Scriptures is not whether the earth is spherical in shape or flat, but that it was God who designed it and the inhabitants who live on it. In the Israel Museum on display, and one of the most well-protected artifacts, is the Isaiah scroll that was found in the mid-1940s, just after the Second World War, in the Dead Sea era in the Judean desert. And God declares in Isaiah, "I have made the earth, and created man upon it. I, even my hands, have stretched out the heavens, and all their hosts have I commanded." Isaiah 45 verse 12. But the emphasis is not about space, but life here on earth. For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it. Why? To be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else. Isaiah 45 and verse 18. So God reinforced what he said in Genesis with a little bit more detail, and declared that he not only made what is in the heavens, but what is on earth, and that everything was designed and put into place for a purpose. But as none of us were eyewitnesses to view this divine act, it is through faith and faith alone we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen, what we view with our senses, were not made of things which do appear. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 3. And an intelligent Christian does not argue and debate a supernatural act, for it is foolishness unto the secular mind. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So by faith it is believed that every three-dimensional shape or color we visualize are things that are made and not things that can make themselves. They didn't just come from nowhere. They were each designed for a specific purpose. But the crowning act of creation is the creature we call ourselves, man, that represents both male and female. According to Genesis, man is an anatomical creature who walks upright with an erect posture and bipedal locomotion. According to the Posture Committee of American Academy of Orthopedics in 1947, posture is the regular and balanced arrangement of skeletal component so as to preserve supportive structures of the body from injury and progressive deformation. Gravity determines how our cardiovascular system reacts, for the human frame is not designed for the absence of terrestrial 1G gravity. Man is not aquatic, though surrounded by water in his mother's womb just before birth. When he goes to swim out into the open, deep water, he needs an external breathing apparatus to support him, for he has lungs and not gills. If he were in space or weightless for long periods of time, it leads to bone loss, muscle deterioration, and life-threatening blood clots. Astronauts in space sleep poorly due to underlying changes in the nervous system. So man, though he wants to enhance his knowledge of the universe with a longing to go to Mars, damages his body while in space in doing so, for the human body was not designed for that environment. Many scientists have realized that it is more convenient to study the origins of life closer to home, here on Earth, and true balanced creationists have learned to use a scientific approach. According to the Concise Oxford Dictionary, to be scientific is to use investigation, according to rules laid down in exact science for performing observations and testing soundness of conclusions, systematic and accurate. George Washington Carver could pass as just an ordinary gardener, but this agronomist achieved some startling results. In 1916, he was made a Fellow or member of Britain's Royal Society of Arts, a London-based British organisation committed to finding practical solutions to social problems. This was an exceptionally rare honour for an American. It was his advice to poor southern farmers that changed the landscape of modern farming in North America that got him his recognition. Southern farmers grew cotton as their one staple crop that was eventually destroyed one year by a beetle called the boll weevil that laid its eggs in cotton buds where its larvae would eat it once it hatched. Carver encouraged them to crop the nutritional legume called the peanut, and this is what he became famous for, where he made over 300 products from it that included cheese, milk, coffee, flour, ink, dyes, soap, wood stains, etc. He testified at the US Congress in 1921 for a proposed tariff on peanuts from foreign competition at the Ways and Means Committee, and was successful in his delivery. As an agricultural expert, he became a member of the United States Department of Agriculture, and under the US Constitution in 1935, he signed an oath of office to serve the interests of the US plant industry. He collected over 1,000 specimens of fungi, primarily from the southern United States, for the US government, and some of them were even named after him in his honor. But these weren't the only things. He has a bridge named after him in Iowa. There is a nuclear submarine, the USS George Washington Carver, that was named also in his honor. There are a number of schools named after him, and a museum is named after him, and he became the first person, other than the president, who has a national monument in his honor. Today's generation is drawn into the euphoria of saving the environment, where many are going eco-friendly and protecting nature. But Carver was teaching biodiversity, and man should be closer to his environment since the beginning of the 20th century. The late Henry Ford was a US billionaire, the founder of the Ford Motor Company, and the sponsor of the development of the assembly line technique of mass production. When he was looking for new ways to enhance the quality of his new automobiles, who did he look to? George Washington Carver. For he saw his unique talents, and they both worked together in making alternative fuels with soybeans, where Carver extracted rubber from the milk of the Golden Rock plant to help improve on Ford's tires. Thomas Edison offered Carver thousands of dollars to work with him, but Carver turned down the offer, for he saw the benefits of enriching his fellow blacks and preparing them for the wider world. So he remained till his death in the staff of the Tuskegee Institute as a botany and agriculture professor. He was educated in Iowa, being the only black student, and he eventually became a member of the staff before he came to Tuskegee. And one of his students, who he taught agriculture, was Henry A. Wallace, who remained a good friend of Carver. Wallace became the 10th United States Secretary of Commerce, the 11th United States Secretary of Agriculture, and the 33rd Vice President of the United States alongside US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who also made a personal visit to George Washington Carver for his dedication in plant pathology and mycology, and the different ways in which he taught people how to best interact with the natural world. He patented a number of different products from the materials he extracted from different plants, from paints to dyes. The list is endless. In his life experiences, he could have been an angry black male with a chip on his shoulder. He had all the excuses to be. He was born a slave, kidnapped as a child, separated from his biological mother for life, rejected from schools because of his race, an eyewitness to a horrific lynching. But he believed that if you are going to profess Jesus, you need to live Jesus and stand firm in your faith even when persecution comes at you and when all around you seems dark. And in his deep search for knowledge and truth, he would ask the right questions concerning the origins of life, how the universe worked, and why was man created on this earth. In a lecture in 1921, he said, "Years ago, I went into my laboratory and said, 'Dear Mr. Creator, please tell me what the universe was made for.' The great creator answered, 'You want to know too much for that little mind of yours. Ask for something more your size, little man.' Then I asked, 'Please, Mr. Creator, tell me what was man made for?' Again the great creator replied, 'You are still asking too much. Cut down on the extent and improve the intent.' So then I asked, 'Please, Mr. Creator, will you tell me what the peanut was made for?' His critics have labeled him as a mystic, a man who spoke to his imaginary friend. But his imaginary friend helped him to become a chemist, botanist, biologist, agronomist, and inventor, where he became the father of chemistry, the savior of southern farming, who laid one of the foundations for organic farming and today's research on plant-based fuels, medicines, and everyday products, ecology, conservation, ethnobotany, and biological development. And even after 70 years, after his death, he is still receiving posthumous awards. But he was not the only one who would ask questions about the origins of life and the natural world. There was also another brilliant mind. This man became a member of London's Royal Society. There is a bust of him in the British Museum, a carving of him in the grounds of the British Library, a statue of him among other scientists in a museum in Oxford in England. In London's Piccadilly Circus, his old house is now turned into a library that still stands, and his name is engraved on it, Sir Isaac Newton. He also lived in another house in Piccadilly Circus, and his name is also engraved on that one also. Sir Isaac Newton believed that the universe was a clock that was wound up at the beginning of time by God, and Newton's laws is the fundamental language of the universe, where he laid the foundation for modern physics. Like Carver, Newton knew the most effective way to understand how life works is by observation and experimentation. And through his painstaking efforts, he gave to us calculus, a quite complicated mathematical formula. He introduced to us the laws of optics by first starting by experimenting with his own eye. He also introduced the laws of motion and the laws of gravity. What goes up must come down. And he even named the different colors in the rainbow. In his deeper search for the knowledge of truth, a posthumous work of his The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms was published. In his thirst to understand the origins of world empires, and he put together a chronology of world events using astronomer Ptolemy and historians Herodotus, Homer and Flavius Josephus, where he mentioned the ancient Nubian kingdom of Kush in northeast Africa, the vast Assyrian Empire that was once in modern-day Iraq, and the influence of the Greek culture and also different customs they adopted from surrounding nations. He mentioned Shabaka, one of the first kings of the Kushite kingdom who ruled the 25th dynasty of Egypt. The Assyrian king who is mentioned on Assyrian monuments and in the Bible, Esarhaddon, and Philip II, the founder of the Macedonian Empire and father to Alexander the Great. Modern telescopes that can magnify their huge lenses into space are modeled after his development and his inventions. And while modern naturalist cosmologists try to dismiss and rule out God as the creator of the universe, not Newton. For in his most famous work, he published in 1687 the Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. In his deep search to find out the origins of life, this was his conclusion. Because the parts of space cannot be seen or distinguished from one another by our senses, therefore in their stead we use sensible measures of time. Of this sort is gravity, by which bodies tend to the center of the earth's magnetism, by which iron tends to the lodestone, and that force, whatever it is, by which planets are perpetually drawn aside from the rectilinear motions which otherwise they would pursue and made to revolve in curvilinear orbits. The most beautiful system of the sun, planets and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. God is the same God, always and everywhere. He is omnipresent, not virtually only, but also substantially, for virtue cannot subsist without substance. Sir Isaac Newton was an absolute genius. They do not produce minds like that anymore. The reason why himself and Carver were so successful in what they were doing is that they stepped outside of their comfort zone. Instead of ritualistically sitting in the pews each week, they studied out what they believed in by exploring all that they could see in the natural world and experimenting with the materials that were available to them, and they have many inventions to their credit. The Royal Mint where Newton worked issued a coin in his honour in 2017. The University of Cambridge, where he studied and lectured, have put his writings online for public access. UNESCO have also put his writings on Bible prophecy online, but he does also have his critics. There are those who are obsessed with his sex life, a reflection of the shallow-mindedness of this age. Many have called him an occultist because of his temporal dabbling in alchemy. Some are saying that calculus was first developed in India, which may be true. But they are wrong in saying that he got it from the Jesuits. They were some of his most fiercest opponents. He predicted that the world will end in 2060, and his critics in both secular and religious circles have disregarded him completely. There is a reason why his criticism is so fierce. One of the most cherished developments in life should be childhood, where children should be spending quality time with family and outdoors in nature. But instead, there is a global epidemic of short-sightedness or myopia, as children spend less and less time outdoors. This dumbs down their intelligence. They are being educated in neo-Gnostic animistic nature worship mysticism, where instead of being encouraged to go outdoors and spend time with nature to see how it operates and functions, they are fed with Lamitree Carl Sagan philosophy that we are one with the universe and with nature. Adults are no different. They spend most of their time on their phones, also damaging their vision. Very rarely do you see people reading a newspaper or a book in the public. People rarely socialize, and the internet is also dumbing down their intelligence. Today's generation are a community of followers. There are not many deep thinkers. Most limit their thinking within the cultural restraints of their social communities. They rarely branch out of their cultural paradigm. Modern science restricts you to an institutionalized bias, where you can't experiment, think, or express a view outside of a tightly controlled academic climate. If you try, it will cost you your reputation and your livelihood. Many Christians quote a scriptural passage off their head, enforce it in people's ears, and think that it is enough. The Bible said it is foolishness unto the secular mind. You need to go deeper. You need to spend time in nature, and that takes patience. But as you observe it carefully, you will see how it works. One man who followed the biblical principle, like Newton and Carver, knew that in order to fully appreciate and understand nature, you need to step outside of the textbooks that are filled with so many man-made biases and go to nature itself. And this is what Dr. James Aitken Wiley said. All true philosophy is divine. God is its author, inasmuch as he ordained the laws of matter and endowed every body with its special properties and powers. All true science is just the knowledge of those divinely ordained laws and properties. If you would have a real, true, and useful science, you must go to nature. You must study her laws. You must observe her workings. You must put her to the question. You must sit down at her feet and become her disciple and listen reverentially to her voice. We shall find out more on the origins of life in an up-and-coming study called DNA.